Thank you. I am so grateful to be here. I'm grateful to the conference staff, grateful to the staff at the inn, to the cleaning staff. I know that in a lot of ways the function of those institutions is, or the ethos is invisibility. But I see you, and I know we see you, and I'm grateful. I want to read 4 poems from my first book, Land of Fire, now entering its 3rd year. Ending date unknown, I suppose. And then 3 new poems, and hopefully give you a sense of the book and maybe where I'm going as a writer. I'll start with the first book in the collection, and in terms of some narrative grounding, my second son was born, and the nurses said he had a chest that broke records. I didn't really quite know what that means. He's a very large chest. But then afterward, we almost immediately knew there was some trouble. He had trouble breathing. His larynx was unformed or floppy, and he had a condition that's quite common, laryngeal malaise, that he would grow out of. But out of that unknowing what would become of him, and while sitting in a chapel cathedral of stained glass, I wrote this poem. Maybe thinking of children, but maybe anything we make. The poem is, "We make a thing we marvel." We make a thing we marvel and learn to worry. Light through the red glass of a prophet's robe makes us red. We see a horse return the hour before storm in distress. We distress. The thing we make learns to marvel light. We think worry is a robe we can outgrow. In the mirror, we see our bodies without robes, distressed. It storms. The prophet marvels at the horse that spoke. Just this summer, I had the opportunity to go back through the old camera and footage of the day my mother became a citizen of this country. She's an Argentine immigrant. And what's interesting about not just the size of the camera, which weighed about as much as my son with the big chest, it was that the footage, because of the inaccessibility to easy editing tools, sort of appeared like a poem. It was broken, had strains, associative leaps. It reminded me a lot of the day, and I saw my mother. Her joy, her pride. But there was also this undercurrent in these flashes of images of things I didn't quite understand. So in this child perspective, this is the oath. They took the first card that marked her alien when she answered declaration. When she knew the names of statues, they took her fingerprints and weighed her. Then they took her from her children to ask her questions, take her picture. I watched her when she stood in line with others, taking turns reciting words to make them citizens. Some were taken out to smaller rooms before their turn. Some returned. In the oath, my mother cleared her throat before a word, then said the word, made the same sound I knew to listen for when I had lost her in a crowd in the aisles of a store. The sound was louder than the oath. It meant her lungs were still shaped by 30 years of foreign air, despite the vow that made her one of us. They took her country when she spoke. But the chords that first learned Spanish in her throat spoke first. Last strain of loss and its resistance. The book, I think, seeks to approach the narrative experience through imagined experience, immigration, migration on a mythic plane. I'm also quite interested in mistakes. I'm interested in wringing out of the smallest possible thing any meaning that remains. In that spirit, this poem is Mistake. What is beautiful about the Iranian boy who dips his fingers in the river, who is blind, who reads the stones there, is that he translates what he finds for no one. I may be wrong. It was, after all, a film I hardly remember, a boy reading Braille in the riverbed. Once, in a school meeting common to the inner city, I was called to interpret for a Mexican father. The board, raised on a platform, sat before us sipping water. They had closed his son's school. I remember that I barely knew the man's Spanish, that he, at last, kept none of his anger back, but also that, when he stopped speaking, my turn to translate his words, I was confused at first, simply started back in Spanish with what he asked. The father laughed. The board followed. The room of parents broke into laughter. I keep that sound. Like the words I offer no one. Buried stones I find weeding the garden. The word my young son speaks, who finds me there, points to sweat on my forehead, says, water. And this last poem, I've never read in public. For me, it's the heart. I'll dedicate it to the conference and to the coffee shop for having Robert Frost on the wall, directive. Here are your waters in your watering place. Drink and be whole again beyond confusion. It's merch. It's on a T-shirt. I want the T-shirt. But I quote from the poem a different line. A little earlier, the speaker of the poem hides the grail. He says, so the wrong ones won't find it, so can't get saved, as St. Mark says they mustn't. This is my response to that poem, and the title, as St. Mark says they mustn't. Then the river I hadn't found held ransom the rivers I had. I knew I wouldn't find it. I would leave where I wanted to stay. I was convinced we pay no other price. Then the river I hadn't found held everything I had. The way belief holds proof, so we forget. I could hear the sound of water. I thought it didn't matter if I never found what made it until I left. Now for the new. There's a space between the title and the first line of a poem that's interesting to me. I've been writing poems and palindromes, poems that are desperate for the last word to be the title, to have you return. And in this poem, on the repetition of death, it's possible for a moment to keep a thing, to keep a word, to keep someone unended. This book is a book of elegies. Thinking of Nate Marshall's class and his discussion of the elegy, I agree too that the elegy is a kind of love poem. This poem is rhyme. Body, teach my mind to age. Rage has taught me nothing. Pain has taught me only to rage at pain. Blame has taught me nothing, but I still blame. Here lies one taken in their prime. Body, teach my mind to bury prime where I have buried rage, above blame and pain, above age and mind and body, time. Before that word their one repeated ending makes, remains. This is an elegy for my friend Travis. Travis had an absurd and ridiculous life. I wish that I could convey how deeply funny he was and deeply strange. He once fell out of his bed, And somehow, this is only what happened to Travis, fell out of his bed and had all of his weight fall on one finger. He broke the finger. I don't know how it's possible. My wedding, he came with two broken hands. It was a car accident, and the ugliest car I'd ever seen. This is an elegy for Travis, but also for the title of the poem, High School. You're dead now, and have been for years. And so is high school, which I loved, and you hated that I loved. I teach in one. You would have loved that. The way you love to hate spread fast in high school. Like the humidifier's stream of air you drew in to conjure sleep. Like the red across your face, the color of the plastic shape we cut, then buffed in shop class until it gleamed in that last building left designed for beauty and not the utility we hated in high school. You hated your face, that it could not gleam, that all the bottles of soap and cream you drained to make it heal could fill a shop room full, or just that darkened space retracting bleachers make when pulled to hold a school, the student body, that cruel reminder of the tunnel ground beneath our feet. You made a room there to wait out pep rallies, to know the sound applause makes behind its sound when all the body cheers their team. They bury yours, where I stop looking. In all my high school dreams, I am waiting for the rally, for the hate to leave my body through their hands, all their shouting to be seen, unseen. I still hear you clapping underneath. I'll finish this with this poem, Station. Thank you again for listening. I met a friend at Grand Central, New York City. I think that's all you need. Station. In that gold hall near the clock of 4 glass faces stalked by crossing gods and beasts, I found him, held him up. Absent any wasteful sun, I fell upon his neck. Once, when we first learned to test and fake distress in school, 2,000 miles from the spot, I begged to hear how lightning called his uncle back, bright from cloud to crown, then gone. We're strangers here, my friend, I said. My father dead 2 months, yet later at the table given us to dine. Given years to mind the form of fathers minding sons, I feigned the pose. Left arm bent and resting on my leg, I leaned right to hold my cheek and head. The changes in his face. I left the faith, he said. So, I knew that by the drink or by the bitterness that made the drink taste sweet, light. We drank, tried from plates the tavern labeled best, addressed the dead, confessed. He said, who's left to watch us stay? To keep it up. Keep. All I thought to say and did. Command, or maybe just repeat. When I left him at the turnstile to see him off, to stay and watch his face descend, blend back into that host I found him in, I saw 2 shadows cast our choice instead, pretending death or how we dreamed it, meeting at the baffle gate we made of time, station, only to leave it. Thank you very much. Kimberly Reyes.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, so thank you for having me. Thank you to Monica and Nate for a wonderful workshop. And I don't know if she's here, but thank you to Threya, my bathroom mate, for dealing with my detangling schedule. So I'm going to read a poem from my first book, Running to Stand Still. And it's the first poem in the book. And what you need to know is that the Gwendolyn in this poem is Gwendolyn Brooks, who's my favorite poet. And this is an imagined conversation I have with her like all the time. I sit with Gwendolyn. We shuck green peas over large rusty cylinders, over bent ashy knees. Deep in red clay, she smacks my hand. Stop fidgeting, child. Focus. She says the names don't matter. The tastes, the planes, the lessons are the same. Distraction spends time, costs lives. Fill the bucket. Snap and stop for the sap of green. Snap and feel the round to the rise under forefinger. Snap without stopping. Snap. Stop looking down. Peas aren't all seeds. Let the red ground eat. And this next one is called Opening Lines. You keep asking where I'm from. I've said New York City twice, second generation. You keep examining like there's no equation, like we somehow began at the sum. Like later, you won't try to impress with a Wu-Tang lyric, liberties from a Chappelle set. Like you don't know where we are, what we've built. Like you don't know me. You keep asking where we're from because the hyphen sits no direction, like we're still in between. You keep the game going with interrogation. You keep repeating the question. And this one is called A Piece of Him. And one afternoon, the red star, suspended on a pierced Kelly green cap, a starfish caught in cryo-sleep, fell out of a brown lunch bag in a crop of crinkled brown lunch bags, slinky hunched on the senior lunch bench. Turkey, tomatoes, capers, cheese, prudence, Post-its, grooming, arugula, tuna, white bread, rye. Our home opened to the clank of steel on asphalt, iron to echo, unraveling, the day the Heineken top dropped out. And this poem is called Reyes, which is kind of a problem when you send things and they're like, it has to be anonymous. And I'm like, I'm not retitling this poem, so. On still Saturdays, I disappear into a plush brown love seat in father's, mother's faded beige living room. We'd watch white, dead-eyed slashers expose eager, glistening bodies, Jason, Freddie, and Michael. Mass stowaways I understood to be birthed beneath the red Atlantic, explaining gore and the many doors of no return to a child prying for a way back home. We were one. We were mestizo red, my yellow grandmother and me. The machete sugarcane bled red on the island, dark and Hebrew Salinas poor. Red was the language we spoke, fertile in storied humility. The good red on the mainland, the mixed and other and ancient and othered, rich, got some Indian in me, reigning red. Whose scorn I didn't know then. The, why is your last name Reyes? Is your husband Spanish? This. Then we only had the scripted anodyne red leaking out of the screen. And this next one is deceptively chipper, which I feel like is like my note. Like that's exactly where I want to be. And it's called Want My MTV. And I should say this entire book, I mean, it's called Running to Stand Still. It's, shout out to Gen X, a U2 song. And this whole book is, you know, sort of like a meditation on the fact that for 3 decades, my poets were all musicians. It was like 3 decades in that I took my first real poetry class, and so it's kind of like a tribute to that. This one's called Want My MTV. More than AIDS, Arthur Ashe said his true burden was being black. CeCe DeVille said being a junkie was sexier than being fat. Everything I know I learned from TV, so my narration is jerky, preemptive, unreliable. I know Madonna said power is being told you're not loved, undesirable, and not being destroyed between commercial breaks. Okay, so this next one, I should warn you, has some sudden violence in it, and it is sort of about my experience of reading about something really terrible that happened over social media that I was connected to but not connected to, and it's just sort of a meditation on the way that our mind wanders in this surreal world, and like if we're ever really connected to anything anymore. And it's called The Body. You keep reading about this woman you don't know, maybe you knew, back in J school. It was J school, so really, details you should remember. This woman disappeared. People, some you know, are memorializing and celebrating her work. They say she was smart, fearless, always smiling. Divers found her head today, and suddenly you realize you didn't know what happened, you didn't know what was missing. You scrolled, but stopped to read a funny post about Project Runway, thought about Heidi Klum, how her nickname was The Body. You always thought that was weird. Heidi Klum sold makeup too, which required a face or at least a smile to attach to the body. The name of the woman you don't know is Kim, was Kim. You should have remembered another Kim in your cohort, but she's not familiar. Not even when you see her headshot in the email for the memorial at your school. There have been a few. She was maybe your age, but strawberry blonde, and when she took the photo, maybe there was a fan in the room, or she just turned her head for the flash at exactly the right time, which is hard to do, because she was engulfed, strands of orbiting amber flames, crystallized aglow. You remember Madonna's hair floated the same way in the Live to Tell video. There was a Project Runway contestant, Stella, who'd pronounced leather without the R, which you didn't pick up at first because you're from New York, but then you saw how it was funny, how it became a joke, how people can be funny without even trying, if being funny just means people are laughing at you. You'd watch Project Runway in bed with this man with blue and red snake tattoos, who also secretly loved Tim Gunn and Stella. He had a thick Boston accent that tickled as he both slowly coo leather back at the screen. Once, through vodka breath, he told you the only reason you were in his bed, your body. He could take or leave your smile. Snakeskin is leather. Turns out turning out cattle isn't the only way. Could be any hide. Snakeskin can be expensive, tends to cost more when there's an ornamental head attached to the skin of what used to be a complete body. It took probably a month, more than months, from what you could tell, from what people you knew were vaguely saying. Curated clicks, round, yellow tears. More than a month to figure out if it was an accident. You were just skimming, suppose maybe she fell off the boat. For a while you thought it could have been negligence. She could have been drinking, partying, smiling on the boat when something bad happened. No one's fault. Make it work is what Tim Gunn would snap at contestants and why he's your hero. At least some of us try. Turns out Kim was reporting about a man on his boat, the way you learned in J school, studying a man in his natural habitat. One of the news stories you finally ingested said this man had mad fantasies about women's heads, mutilated torsos, burnt bodies. Kim was probably killed by this man she probably didn't know before she got on a submarine. A sub, not the dreamboat you'd envisioned. And you don't know what happened. You scrolled, but didn't know the story at all. And this last one that I'm going to read from the book starts with an epigraph from the band Paul Kelly and the Stormwater Boys. Shout out to Random Australian Rock. And the epigraph is, "Don't stand so close to the window. Somebody out there might see. And you're not supposed to be here with me. And the walls have ears and the darkness has eyes. Don't you see?" My grandmother's body was still with us weeks after she tried to leave. Weeks after my mother, always nervous, thunderstorms begged me away from the window. Flashing jewelry, 3 clanking bangles. Superstition says, don't tempt aroused fate. My grandmother brought back from a trip to the Bahamas, her dream week, her second time on a plane at 63, solo, still working, still bold enough to save, fly, buy silver. My grandmother's first time on a plane, taking me down to South Carolina, to see the farm that fabled nothing that kept her from becoming something, kept giving her babies, just one look, she'd swell. She forewarned the consequence of sass and heat, and one day the opening came, to leave the weeds and beatings, a chance up north for cleaning house. I shook my silver at the cracking lavender and pink sky, running on preordained rage and showing my ass and asking for trouble, beckoning prepubescent summer rain. In July, New York City, the phone rang. Woodhull Hospital. The weeds came calling. 36 days, no insurance, electrical outages, backup generators, a coma that also refused her offering, mercy. A stroke the doctors misnamed, respirators, jutting, mangled, exploited remains. She awoke, still, slant, face, bile, tubes, snaking their way through her, bidding, I pretend to forget. Escape betrayed her body, finally left in August, in cascades of acidic sweat. And I'm just gonna read one more piece that is kind of directly related to that, just in a different way. It's from a collection of essays that I have, and this is a really small piece, and I don't know if it's even an essay anymore, or a poem, or it's just this thing. And it's called On Land. When I was 7, my parents put me on a plane with my maternal grandmother to see South Carolina, the place she had most immediately come from before New York City. Even before we got on the plane, I was in heaven. There were towering grown-ups, strangers, fawning all over at me at each pause on the trip. Smiling officers at the security lines, consistent hand-holding, free decks of cards and peanuts, crayons, hamburgers, inquiries about my age and when I got to be so adorable. With each gate cleared, each plane boarded, a new set of people. Unknown colors, smells, and adventures waited. I was safe, being in transit, being in temporary regard. We arrived at the family farm around midnight. As our car pulled up, I spotted 3 sets of sparkling eyes, or I guess they spotted us. They gleamed, unblinking and suspended, a few feet in front of the house. As we approached, the eyes got taller and brighter. Soon these curious glints of amber were knee-level to the adults, and almost eye-level to me, transfixed. They were the piercing eyes of German shepherds. I had every reason to assume that these were the hounds of hell, considering all the horror movies I'd mainlined by that tender age, and the fact that I'd never been anywhere close to what could remotely be described as rural, even in the daylight. I only knew asphalt and concrete, tightness and strain. Still, I instinctively knew the difference between curious joy and menace. There was safety in the unpredictability of the hour, freedom. Everyone and everything here could be new. I didn't reach for the comfort of my grandmother's hand in the darkness. I didn't understand ownership or the meaning of property. I didn't understand inheritance in all the non-material ways it can manifest. But the next morning, my grandmother said all I saw was ours. It had been ours for a generation or two. Over the next few days, the plot felt more like home than any land I'd ever been on. I felt nurtured by the deepness and dryness of the soil. Polished each morning from the midnight dew, I could have sworn we brought in. Something about that spot felt nuclear, like a bomb had long gone off there, and in the clearing, a beginning. Like the toxicity of the war was still there, simmering, latent, beneath the surface. Layers of sun-cooked soot and manure and blood caked into a barrier of calm. Like only seeds with genetic code, similar to what was buried, could pollinate the vastness. I knew this from the way the chickens plumped from scraps and leftovers skipped, and the way the heedful dogs pranced through the warm hazel fields. It felt like we all knew this. It felt like the purest dizzy. It felt like a tiny home. Thank you. And now Jyotsna Sreenivasan.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Should I move this? Okay. Sorry, I'm putting my mask away. So my name is Jyotsna Sreenivasan. You've all been wondering how to say my name, so. I am thrilled to be here. This has been an awesome conference. I want to thank everyone, but especially people from my workshop who are here and we've just had an awesome workshop. So I'm going to be reading from my new book of short stories. It's 8 short stories and a novella. And I'm going to be reading from, and it's called These Americans. And I'm going to be reading from the beginning of the novella, which is called Hawk, the bird. Anyway, that's what it's called. And the 2 main characters are Bhagya, who is an elderly woman physician, and she's an immigrant from India, but she's been in the United States for many years, like decades. And her daughter, Manisha, is a middle-aged woman who was born in the US. And the situation is that Bhagya has just recently sold the family home, and she's going to be moving into a condo, and so Manisha is coming over to help her pack. And Manisha has recently gotten a job that her mother disapproves of. So that's the situation. Okay. On the morning of a clear day at the outskirts of a Midwestern city, an elderly but still vigorous woman watched a large bird through her bedroom window. She'd awoken early and was already showered and dressed, although there was no longer anywhere she needed to be. The bird glided on a drift of air over the path by the creek, the distinct scallops of the dark wings and tail outlined against the sky. The woman wore black stretch pants and a polo shirt which displayed, above her left breast, the logo of the Lincoln County Medical Center. Her hair was a short gray cap. Her tan skin didn't look wrinkled so much as carved. On her wrist was a watch with a round white dial and a red second hand. She wore no jewelry. She stood with her feet apart, hands on hips, as though ready to order someone into action. Once the bird floated out of sight, she turned to face the room, strewn with cardboard boxes, some sealed shut and some open and empty. She scratched her head and bent over a planner open on the nightstand. At the 1 o'clock mark, 1 word, Manisha. She straightened, nodded once, and cast her eyes at a framed photo on her dresser, a laughing baby in a frilly dress. She closed her eyes. 2 fine lines appeared on her forehead. Shortly after 1 o'clock, Manisha pulled her minivan into the driveway of the tan house she'd grown up in. She slid closed the door of her vehicle and surveyed the scene. She was thin and athletic, with long black hair and skin a few shades darker than her mother's. She wore cropped jeans and a crisp tailored blouse. Diamonds glinted on her earlobes, and a gold and diamond tennis bracelet graced one wrist. The yard had no flowers, only mature, prickly juniper bushes pressed against the house. A sign had been stabbed into the front lawn, "For sale," and splashed diagonally across, "Sold." Manisha let herself into the house and kicked off her sandals in the entryway. The air smelled of toasted spices, cumin, mustard seeds, turmeric, curry leaves. Sealed cardboard boxes were stacked on the tile floor. Upstairs, her mother sat on a neatly made bed, sorting through items in a drawer which had been pulled out of the dresser. "Hi, sorry I'm late. Charlotte was being clingy when I dropped her off at camp." Bhagya lifted a pile of receipts and papers from the drawer. "I'll work on the closet." Manisha made her way through the crowd of cardboard boxes. Her mother extracted a tiny plastic case from the drawer. Holding it aloft, she said, "What I don't understand is, why 6th grade? You have earned a PhD. You have published papers. Why middle school?" Her accent was Indian, with hard consonants and rolled R's. Her pronunciation was careful and precise. Manisha set a hand on her hip. "Don't start again." "You have not given me a good explanation," said Bhagya. Manisha blew air out of her lips and tossed back her hair. "I like to teach. And this place does not even have a high school. You will not be able to move to higher grades. I enjoy working with children." "You don't feel you will be wasting your education?" Her mother opened the little plastic case. Manisha coaxed a stack of sweaters down from the closet shelf and into her arms. "I'm tired of being an adjunct. I need benefits since Gerard and I separated." "You are still married. He should provide you with benefits." "I don't want to depend on him anymore." Manisha dropped the sweaters into an empty box. Her mother picked out the shiny item from the foam of the case in her hand. Why spend so many years getting a PhD in English literature if you wanted to teach children? She held out on the palm of her hand a square golden object. Here is your Phi Beta Kappa key. Don't you want it? Manisha kneeled to press the sweaters into the box. Mom, this is why I don't try to explain my life to you. I got the PhD because, if you recall, you wanted a doctor in front of my name one way or another. She stood and approached the closet. The room filled with the soft sounds of paper scraping against the wood of the drawer and empty hangers clicking. Manisha dumped a pile of clothes on the bed and began folding them. Her mother pulled an envelope from the drawer and tilted it back and forth to look at both sides. I was going to give you this at your high school graduation. She held it up for Manisha to see. But I did not think you would want it then. We were having so many conflicts. If you don't want it now, I will recycle it. She tossed it across the bed to her daughter. The business envelope had browned with age. Manisha stared at it for a moment. She glanced at her mother, busy with the drawer again. She picked up the envelope and felt the soft, old paper. Tucking a lock of hair behind her ear, she sank to the bed. As she worked her thumb under the glued-down flap, the weakened paper of the envelope ripped. Her eyes shifted to her mother again. The older woman seemed not to have heard the sound of paper tearing. Manisha eased the folded letter out of the jagged gap and flattened it on the bedspread. It had been written on hospital letterhead. The date in the upper right corner caught her eye. You wrote this when I was 1 year old? Her mother had lifted from the drawer a little velvet bag. Manisha tapped the date on the letter. I thought you said you were going to give this to me when I graduated from high school. Just after your father died, I wanted to put into words what we both wished for you. Bhagya pressed the velvet bag to her lap. I thought it would be a nice thing for you when you became an adult, something to keep in mind. Propped against one wall near the closet was an unfinished oil portrait of a dark brown man with a small black and white snapshot of the same man taped to the corner of the canvas. Manisha's eyes traveled to the painting. She shook her head. I wish I could have finished that. The expression on his face. I kept painting over it. You don't remember what he looked like, her mother said, and we don't have many pictures of him. He was always the one behind the camera. Manisha closed her eyes and then shifted her glance to the letter. She scanned the faded cursive ink. I want you to do even better than we have done, her mother had written. You must stand on our shoulders and reach higher. You do not have to be bound by tradition. You can do anything you choose. The whole world is open to you. You were born in the land of freedom. No outdated traditions will stand in your way. The letter repeated similar vague phrases over and over again. It was signed, Bhagya Venkataraman, M.D., and below this, in parentheses, your loving mother. Manisha frowned and touched the signature. You saw yourself as a doctor first and a mother second. Bhagya froze for a moment. Her eyes blazed. Then she set down the velvet bag, stepped around the corner of the bed, and lifted the letter from the bedspread. Maybe things would have been different if he had lived. She folded it and angled it into the torn envelope. That first year at home with you was so difficult for me. You were very fussy. He would come home, pick you up, walk around with you, hum softly, and then you would sleep. What a relief for me to go back to work. Maybe if he had lived, I could have taken more time with you and learned to be a better mother. Bhagya went to set the letter in the drawer, but did not release it from her grasp. I did my best. Even though I hired nannies to look after you, I always made time to cook Indian food. I was not going to raise you on bread and noodles and packaged meals. Bhagya thrust the envelope at Manisha. Take it if you wish, otherwise I will throw it away. Manisha's hands remained on her knees as she frowned at the envelope. She reached over the drawer for it as her mother pulled it back, and they both tugged at it for a second. The letter in its envelope ripped in two. Manisha grabbed both pieces and fit them together on the bedspread in front of her, pressing her palm over the jagged tear. Mom, she cleared her throat. I know you worked hard to send me to a prep school. Even though I didn't feel like I fit in, I do appreciate what you did for me. Bhagya straightened her spine. What do you mean you didn't fit in? Your grades were very good. It was essentially a school for privileged white boys. The rest of us were on the fringes. You were allowed to participate in everything. Bhagya fingered the little velvet bag. You think they'd ever cast a brown girl as the lead in the school musical? I did not want you to waste your time fooling around with drama. Bhagya loosened the drawstring of the bag. Manisha traced the ragged edge of one half of the letter. That's why I'm so excited to be teaching at this school, Mom. Newton is modern. I can be a role model here not only to minority students, but to everyone. Bhagya shook something from the velvet bag onto her palm. She held up what looked to be a large coin. This is the gold medal I won. Manisha peered at it. I've never seen that before. Take it in your hand, Bhagya offered. Manisha accepted the medal, about the size of a silver dollar, and weighed it on her palm. It's heavy. She brushed her thumb over the etched letters spelling out Mysore Medical College and over the caduceus, 2 winged serpents twined around a staff. Wow, so this was an award for surgery. I was best in my class. You never told me this, Mom. On the day I won this, I brought it home to show my family, and my mother offered to have it melted to make a pair of earrings. Can you imagine? My mother did not see the value of a medal. What is the use of keeping this gold in a box, she said. A woman should wear jewelry. Bhagya touched her bare earlobe. I never cared for all that. After my marriage and before I came to the U.S., I distributed all my jewelry to my sisters. She held out her hand for the medal. You are more like my mother in a way. You wanted a diamond bracelet for your college graduation. And I'll stop there.